Jordan, and I'm here today with Esperanza Cintrón, and we're talking about her story collection, Shades, but specifically, we're going to talk about the first story, The Beard. Welcome, Esperanza.
Well, hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm really excited to talk about this story. But I guess, well, the first question I want to start with is the overall theme of the collection. The stories are interwoven,
hmm
and I'd love to hear more about that.
Thematically, I don't know if there is a theme per se. Um, I I like to record history. Okay. And for me, of course, it takes place in the 60s primarily. It's capturing a community at that time, a community that pretty much no longer exists. I, I was more interested in capturing people and personalities, but also because this is primarily, I guess, an impoverished community initially. Um, it's showing that even though there's a struggle, you try to find some joy in your life, because it's just important. And I think that was, for me, it was just showing, trying to humanize a community and capture it historically. Is that making sense?
Totally, totally. And is this based on a community that you grew up in?
Yes, very much so. Because I grew up in Detroit, and I grew up with seven of my aunts, and because my mother's parents passed, and my mother took in seven of her sisters, so it was a boisterous family. And a lot of these stories are stories that they told me or people in the community told me, and of course I embellished them because I'm a writer, but a lot of it is based in truth. And you go from there in order to, I guess, make it more interesting, to hold your readers, to enhance the message if there is a message or whatever. But I have to say this: I sent a book to my uncle who lives in San Diego, and he's my favorite uncle. He's crazy and very out, gay and so forth. And he read The Beard and he said, Epi, this is pornography. And I was like,
Oh my God.
really, Corey?
Really?
I'm like, no, you
Not to,
didn't. Right, exactly.
yeah, not in today's world. I mean, I didn't even blink twice.
This
Yeah.
guy is out. Do you know what I'm saying? He is my craziest uncle. And I'm just like, it's really, he was expecting me to write, I guess, like Dorothy West. I don't know if you're familiar with Dorothy West. She's an African American writer that writes about rich Black people in Martha's Vineyards and so forth, hoity toity kind of thing, which is great. But that is not my voice. And he knows that's not my voice. But he was like expecting that, I guess, because his perception of a writer is, that kind of a thing. And I'm like, you know what, boy?
That is hilarious. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So, what about, let's talk about Shades. So the decisions to name it Shades, and then you have the epigraph in the beginning where you have the definitions. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Most of my books do that. Even my books of poetry, I'll have a word that will like be the stimulus, and then I'll examine all the definitions and interpretations, the connotations and denotations of a given word. I just finished a book of poetry called Boulders, and I did the same kind of thing. But with shades, especially in the African American community, there are so many different perspectives and definitions of the word, because a shade is a ghost. You have shades of color, the whole concept of colorism in the African American community. The whole thing about wearing shades and being cool, kind of thing. They're just all kinds of dimensions of the concept of shade. And that is not as overt in the book, but it's there. the concept of this haunting thing that continues. And the very last story, um, it's shades as it relates to economic situations, the differences and so forth, because the book is evolutionary with regard to economic situations, because the last character is the daughter of Diane, and she goes through, but she reaches a higher economic situation, and so it's to show that gradual change.
Yeah, it's like a subtle delineation kind of
Yes, yes,
between all these different various
yeah,
strata.
color, because it starts with the color thing, because you've got Belle, who is very dark, and you've got I can't even remember her name.
Margaret, I know. We talked about that earlier, forgetting the
Right,
just forget the
Margaret,
character's
who is
name.
light skinned. And there are
Yeah.
perceptions about, dark and light, from externally how white people will see it, but also internally how black people perceive color changes, because it's stereotypically that lighter people receive more advantages and are raised soft. Okay, which is a little true of Margaret, because Margaret is kind of naive. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, she's just sort of floating through life. Whereas Belle is tougher because she's had more obstacles to deal with. And her perceptions of life are, I'm going to use before I get used kind of thing. Whereas Margaret is like, chill, have a good time. I want a boyfriend. I want to take care of my daughters, that kind of thing. Their perceptions in life are different because they're perceived differently. Is
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And you described, so Margaret's described at one point as what she called her, like that yellow, that silly yellow bitch.
right?
And I
Because
kind of thought I knew what, I kind of vaguely, I know basically, I think what yellow means, but I'd love to know what it means in that context in the
yellow
1960s.
is light skin.
Light
Light
skinned.
skin.
Okay,
I
that's what
mean,
I
yeah,
thought. But
it's light skin. There are variations of yellow, but it's light skin. You know, um, I mean, history. You know about miscegenation, and so black people come in all colors because of the whole rape and pillage kind of thing. I mean, it. History. It's
yep.
like there's no African American born here that doesn't have other European elements in their bodies. Is that
Mm-hmm.
you know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay, well, so into the story we go. All right, so it starts out, it's so interesting that it starts out, Belle comes downstairs and asks me if I want to go to the bar with her. I tell her I don't feel like it, that I'd rather stay home and watch Twilight Zone. And I love and I love that because it feels like Twilight Zone is doing a lot of work there. It seems like because they enter into sort of the twilight zone of the bar too. I mean, it's not what you expect is going to happen in the bar. It is Twilight Zone-ish.
well, yeah, a lot of things about Twilight Zone, because I don't know. Rod Serling was the writer producer. Rod Serling was thought to be a handsome guy, the dark hair, very Mediterranean looking in his appearance. He was also an activist, both anti-war as well as with regard to racial desegregation and so forth. He wrote pieces and so forth, even for Twilight Zone, that dealt with you know, dealing with people lynchings and so forth like that. So also the fact that Twilight Zone was one of the first sci-fi kinds of horror kind of shows that was on television. It's very popular, and a lot of people watched it. So there's that whole thing of of bringing in other kinds of elements, change. Because this, even though it takes place in the 60s, it's in the midst of change. Everything is changing because this is like uh, on the cusp of like the feminist movement, change in literary perceptions, change in modes of medium in terms of, television and radio and that kind of thing, change in modes of music. I know that it's kind of crazy. These are not things that we as, I don't know, as writers think about, like, oh, I'm going to put this change in there. These are they're sort of natural, in the sense when you're creating that environment, when you're trying to recreate that environment, you're trying to capture the elements and give your reader a sense of the time period. I really like to write history. I'm working on a novel right now. I'm editing for the 100th time, and it takes place in 1870, which has really
Wow.
been because it's, well, 1870. It's right after the Civil War. You've got amendments in terms of the 15th Amendment and so forth going on. You've got the Indian Wars. There's like a lot of stuff happening, and it's just, I like these periods in history that
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 underweave the story or
right,
underlay the
that, yeah,
story.
exactly, because
Hmm.
it's like, because my daughter, she writes too, and she's always talked about world building, and I think that's great when you create new worlds or whatever. But just trying to create an existing world or a world that existed, to me, is a challenge in and of itself, because you're trying to allow your reader a vicarious experience, which involves all their senses. And so you have to consider all these elements. You have to make sure that they can see and smell and hear and, you know,
Hmm.
and feel that. It's like, I don't know. I don't know if you read one of the stories in there called Please Love Me.
Hmm.
It's about a girl that's being beaten. And that was one of the hardest things, because for some reason, the first time I wrote it, there was a lot more repetition, because for me, it was like that the striking elements were resonance, that and the repetition. So I had to think of different ways to represent the abuse and the, I don't know. Anyway.
Well, no, it's interesting. Yeah, I think also like they always say the more heightened or the more tense the situation, the cooler you should play it. Like allow the
Yeah,
reader to feel, and it's so hard to do that because
exactly.
when you're writing it, you get so worked up. It just
Exactly.
the impulse is to overwrite, I think.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's an emotional experience for you. For me, the writer, it's an emotional experience. And it's kind of hard to divorce yourself once you, because also, see, I write, I write sensual fiction under another name.
Oh, I didn't know
So,
that.
yeah,
Nice.
I
I like that. Yeah, that's
and
awesome.
so I do have to sometimes pull those reins, because different writing requires, or different audiences and different mediums, if you will, because writing, yeah, it's different, you
It is
know.
different.
So,
Yeah, like I write poetry and fiction, and for a long time my fiction came out like much more reportorial, and then my
ah,
my my poetry was very imagistic. And then I it took a long time to figure out how to, well, you can have imagery in your fiction too, and that would actually be very helpful. It's
yeah.
strange how different parts of the brain take over. But I want to get back to the story. How
No,
did you
but
just Oh,
oh,
go
I
ahead.
was
Go.
just
No.
going to respond to what you said about having a, like, reportage in your fiction. For me, it was the opposite. I had to like pull back, and because I was like spilling over with all of these images. So I
Yes.
understand, it's like, because you got to find the happy medium. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
The
Yeah.
thing that best reflects whatever it is you're trying to convey.
Yeah. I was just listening to Rebecca Mackay. She, who wrote The Great Believers. Do you know her?
No.
She's a good writer. And she was saying that you have to think about the ear of the story, meaning who are you telling the story to and how much do they know about your world? And so I was thinking
Mm.
about that in terms of the beard, because we enter right in. I mean, I think you can read the back cover of the book and you kind of know where you're going to start. But we enter right in. It's very immediate, and then we're just with Margaret and Belle, and then we go to the bar or whatever. And I'm just curious how that came to be the first, or why how you decided on that one as the first story.
Well, because of the language, really. Because I really wanted to capture the vernacular of the community, and I was so far removed from it, because I mean, I was a kid, actually, back then, and but they used to my aunts as I got older. I told you I lived with my aunts. They called me encyclopedia because I would remember things and tell on them. I would tell my mother, right?
Oh my God.
But
That's
I tried to capture the language that way. But as you grow older and you become more educated and so forth, you lose the vernacular. So for me, with the conversation between Margaret and Bill was pulling me back into the vernacular. I wanted to capture the rhythms of the speech. And so the story went from there. That's why you have Margaret and you have Belle, because, well, neither one of them can tell each other's story. They have to tell you from their perspective. And I'm trying to make it come out of their mouths, if you will, and it's really hard because you have to separate the two. It's I think it's kind of easier to write third person. Do you know what I mean? And
I
I
think
know
so too.
people,
Yeah.
but yeah, because third person, you know all everybody's business. You could just, but then you can get into the rut of being pedantic. If you're in third person, so sometimes you have to. Well, at least I have to revert to first person in order to just maintain character.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the vernacular between the two, they're both the same. They're speaking the same way, but it's the tone, and it's so subtle because it's just, Margaret is she's softer,
Yeah.
and Belle. I mean, it comes across in the speech, but
Good.
it
Good.
was yeah, definitely, but it was just a very subtle difference. So how did you? So you set it in the bar. Was it a work of imagination to come up with what that bar would look like? And I think when I sent you the questions, I was wondering if the Apex on Oakland was a real place.
It was a real place. I didn't see it until I was really grown. I mean, of course, I had to be older to. I don't think it's open anymore, but it was a real bar on Oakland, and I don't remember the side street, but I kind of grew up on the North End. I mean, right now the North End is pretty much decimated. I mean, there's houses here and there, and we've been gentrified, so people are coming back into the area and so forth. And a lot of the stuff that I knew or that I saw or that even people told me about is no longer there. But the Apex was a real bar, and I can imagine, I can see it in my head now, but I didn't really go into the bar until I was probably in my late 20s. And that was more because I was curious because my aunts talked about it and I wanted to know what this place was. And of course, when I went, it was a lot shadier looking. You know what I mean? Because it was like years and years and years later. Because of course, my mother wouldn't have let me go in there, as a kid. It's probably,
Exactly. So, but
yeah.
basically, you took what you saw that 20 years later and just sort of spiffed it up a little bit,
It,
still in great shape.
yeah,
So
'cause it was,
where, oh, I was just wondering like where, because I live in the Detroit area, but I'm not from there originally, so I still don't know all the areas. Where actually is that now? Like, would that be considered what part
okay,
of
do you know
town?
the North End? Before it's just north of Midtown. You know where Midtown, you know where the Grand
Yep,
Boulevard is?
yep, and
Okay,
New
so if you
Center.
go, yeah, if you go about a mile up, then that's where the North End begins. And it goes
Okay,
all the way to Tramick.
yep,
There's a railroad track and so forth. It's
yep,
actually the first area that blacks were allowed after, because when in the 20s and 30s and so forth, blacks settled in Paradise Valley,
mhm.
which was closer to downtown. It was actually, I live in Lafayette Park. You know Lafayette Park?
Oh yeah, sure, yep,
Lafayette Park was Paradise Valley back in the day. Okay. And then it was, the 1970s, it was everything was torn down and rebuilt. But blacks started to move into the North End. And it was just north of downtown. That's why it's called the North End. And
okay,
so,
cool. All
it's
right, this is good to know.
yeah,
Well, this
but
is also good for people who aren't from Detroit who are listening, maybe to
yeah,
know
a
all
lot
this.
of
Yeah.
people, yeah. And so, but like I said, I grew up because my grandfather built his house from with his own hands and so forth, and It was on a street called Greeley, which doesn't have any houses anymore because that whole area is because Chrysler tore down a lot of stuff and built a huge plant over there. You know, it's just area
Yeah,
in flux.
it's
Yeah,
changed. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I remember I was a little kid. Excuse me. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. That's okay. I was just going to ask you about the characters themselves. They, where did you get the idea for this storyline for those characters? I'm curious
um,
because I always think of the
Jennifer.
60s or like the early, it's, it just seemed like a time of people were sexually repressed or they didn't talk about sex. But maybe I'm
Um,
wrong. I mean, I was born in 67, so I missed it. I don't know.
I don't know. No, no. Actually, I mean, maybe it's because okay, like I said, I grew up with my seven aunts and my mother, and my mother was very outspoken. I mean, she would talk about these things, and she would tell you things because she wanted you to know. She didn't want any grandbabies too early. When her mother passed, I think the youngest was 4 and the oldest was like 16 or something. So you've got a range of women there. And so I don't know, it wasn't a repressed thing. I mean, of course you weren't supposed to do anything,
But
but
that's good. Like it's different than I grew up in a Catholic community, like nobody told us
oh,
anything. Yeah. So, but you're
well,
saying
I grew up.
in that community, everybody could talk about it. You just couldn't do it
No, no, I can't. I'm not saying in that community.
in your
And
house.
right, because I was raised Pentecostal. I don't know if you know
Oh,
Pentecostal.
I do.
And Pentecostal, when my mother would send us to Saturday Bible school, like, in the summertime, and, we're like 4, 5 years old, and she would send us you remember how they used to have those little play suits, okay, like little shorts and so forth?
Yes, yes.
She would send us, and the women of the church would go to the poor box and make us put on sweaters to cover our limbs. We were
Oh,
tempting people with our limbs. So,
well,
we would have to wear these in this hot church. So no, it was a repressed time. It's just in my household, my mother had to deal with these burgeoning women, you know,
yes,
and I think
yes.
that she felt it was necessary to be frank with them because
Okay.
my mother was only like 26 when she took in her sisters.
Oh
You
my
know,
gosh.
that's
Wow.
very young.
That's
So I think that was her the only way she could deal with it. I mean, because they're her sisters; these are not her children.
right. Yeah. And she's like, okay, there's enough going on here without adding
Right,
to
how being
it.
secretive or whatever. So
Yeah.
outside of our house, that's one thing. And like I said, when we went to the church, the ladies would cover us, and we're children. We're like 4 or 5 years old. And
Yeah.
but inside the house, mother was like, they would have these discussions about, what you shave and what you don't shave.
Oh my God, that's good. I wish
I,
someone had told me that.
No, but I remember now. I was just a child sitting over there. I'm supposed to be coloring or whatever, and I'm listening to all of this. I'm not supposed to be hearing all this.
Right,
So,
right.
but I did. They called me encyclopedia. I used to like, pretend I'm coloring and I'm hearing all this juicy stuff.
So did you hear a story that was similar to the
Yes,
story of Margaret? Oh, you did. Okay, so tell me about
yes. As a
that.
matter of fact, Belle is based on a friend of my mother's who she came from, I think it was Alabama, and she had a lot of children and a husband who had difficulty finding work. And she was very dark skinned, very beautiful woman, but she didn't know she was beautiful because she was dark skinned and this was the 60s. You know what I'm saying? And she had these kids and this husband, and she did what she had to do in order to feed her family. I know the husband's supposed to feed the family, but that doesn't always happen.
So did he know what
She
was
did.
going on? Did he know or was he?
I was a kid. I don't. I'm
Yeah, who
assuming he.
knows? This is why we write fiction because you don't.
Right, exactly. Like I
We
said,
just
I'm
fill
making
in the blanks. Yeah.
start with your premise and then you color in the. But I remember Susie, and I remember because she used to smoke a lot of cigarettes, and that was like mother didn't smoke, or my mom, she was like, I mean, other than telling her sisters what they had to do, she was, I guess, repressed in a sense.
Mhm.
But but Susie, I really kind of liked her a lot. You know what I mean?
I was going to say that I really liked Belle a lot.
That's what, yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly. I
like her.
liked her.
Yeah.
And I know she was
Okay.
wild and crazy, but
Are
you
they
know,
Pell Mell cigarettes, or is she just calling him that? Or was
they're
it Paul
Paul
Mall?
Mall.
Okay, but she
Paul
calls him Pell
Paul
Mell.
Mall. They're Paul Mall, but she called him Pale Male.
Pell Mell. Okay. God, people smoked a lot back then, didn't
Yes,
they? Yes.
filterless. No
Yeah.
filter.
It was so gross. I just
Right.
still
And
remember
the
coughing all the
smell,
time.
the smell. Oh my God.
Yeah,
You know.
I know. I know. So I'm wondering about, okay, did you have to research, or did you recall the outfits they wore during the period, like the music playing in the jukebox? Like, did that all involve a lot of research, or you just came back to you? Because you said you do remember everything and they used to call you
But I did have
encyclopedia.
to like re-research. I had a general idea, but
Uh-huh.
some things I did, I had to go, okay, was this song at this period of time? Because you know how you have these songs in your head and you have to
Mhm.
like really see, did it come out in 1980 or was it in 1960? So
Right.
I had to research, but I began with a body of knowledge and I had to verify,
Right.
to make
That it was
sure.
correct. Okay.
Yeah.
And I thought it was, so the details are really interesting too. Like Belle is drinking a beer out of the bottle, which I guess is very unladylike, and I can just imagine why. But I think it seems like so organic to the story that she would be doing that. And I know that things come to writers differently. Like some people get character first, some people get plot first, some people get scene first. It seems like, or it felt like, the characters came first to you. But I want to ask you that question. I'm just curious for this
Yeah, for
book.
me, I think with all of my writing, I think the people come and then the stories revolve around the people because they sort of like tell you the story, you know? They sort of like, and then situations arise and then they react to the situation, you know? So,
So
yeah.
did it surprise you where this story went, or had you heard a similar story about? So people will have read the story before we're talking, so I can spoil it. But the part about the razor and everything, did that surprise you? Or was that from a story you've heard, or a little of both?
No, it didn't surprise me because remember they would tell all these stories, and like I said, a lot of people were coming up. I know you've heard of the mass migration, when a lot of black people came from, so they were still coming up in the 50s and 60s, and they would tell these stories about how a woman would take the straight razor and tuck it down in her boobs, you know what I mean, before she went out, that was her protection,
I mean,
and
that's a
how
little
such and such.
scary too. I hope you don't
Oh, it
cut
wasn't
yourself.
scary to me
No,
because I heard
I
these
mean like the
stories.
straight, no, I mean like the razor. Like
Yeah,
you could get injured.
but it had
Oh,
a
a
steel
thing.
over it. Yeah, it was like it bent in half. It was like, yeah, it was like a straight razor like this that the guys
Oh,
use,
yes, yes,
but
got
it
it.
had a
A
cover.
long handle and a cover.
Right, and you bend it in
Yes.
half, right? And they would tuck it in their boobs, and that was their protection if they're going to go out at night. Especially like because when you think about it, because I used to live in Memphis, in Tennessee for a while when I was married, but my husband took me to the barn, which was this like juke joint, they used to call them juke joints, out
Sure.
way out in the boonies, like down way out. Okay, and it's like a very rustic bar, people are dancing and drinking. And I'm thinking if a woman's going to that place by herself, she needs a straight razor.
Yes, she does.
Because number one, we're out there.
That's
And
scary.
this was actually in the, okay, this must have been the late 70s. Okay. But there still weren't any street lights out there. Do you
Oh
know what
my
I'm saying?
gosh. Yeah, I can
Dark
just,
except for in this place. So
right.
she had a gun. So it's like,
That is so scary. Just thinking about that is so scary. Because, like, I'm glad to be an older woman now for that very reason.
yeah, you think about these young women going out to
I
these,
mean,
I mean, so but that was their protection. Now,
yeah,
but the thing is, you had to be, I don't know, I think you had to be a real self-assured woman to tuck a razor and go out there. You know what
I think so too. I do too. I mean, now they have so my daughter carries mace, and it's so interesting because my sons don't carry mace,
I see?
It's still the same world it was in a way.
Exactly. No, no, it really is because we still have to protect ourselves as women, which is
Hmm.
really, you would think all this time that it would be better, but honestly,
It doesn't feel
people,
better.
no.
Yeah.
It's sad to say that I have to say some people need to think about how they're raising their sons. That's all I have to say. Because some people are not raising their sons to respect women.
That's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
I'm
I
just
know. Well, we could go down that. Oh,
yeah,
I could go on about that forever because I have so many thoughts about that. We need to do that. But anyway, all right, we'll talk again later. I hope. All right. But so she pulls it out and she cuts him, and she doesn't know at the end of the story because some people will only have this one story. We don't know um, what happens after that. She goes back to get Margaret, and she's like, I've cut someone. He may be dead. And that was the part where I was like, was that totally imagined, that moment where she actually cut someone, or had you heard about someone who had actually cut someone?
people got
Or
cut.
okay.
People
So
got,
it was so it didn't come out of thin air. Like
no,
you
people
were
got.
it,
The thing is, also, I'm sure you're aware of what's happening with regard to policemen and so forth,
yes,
and Black
yes,
Lives Matter.
yes,
In the Black community, you don't call the police unless you really have to, kind of thing. So that's one of those things where if she got away, that she just leaves that mess there for somebody else to clean up. You know what I mean? Because nobody's going
yes,
to confront her because she's gone, right? So
right.
it's like I'm leaving this situation now. It's not like, oh, somebody's cutting. Let's call the police because
Yeah, it's
no,
not going to
no,
happen.
because they're not your friends. They're not
Right.
your friends. You get
Yes.
away from that situation.
Yeah.
Right, and if you're black or Latin or because you know I'm Puerto Rican, I'm
Mhm.
Afro Latin, right? You just know how to deal with situations in order to extricate yourself,
Mhm.
because the more people you bring into it, the more danger you're putting yourself in. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's why I liked Belle too, from a feminist perspective too, because she took care of herself. She took care of the situation, and I know it's not optimal to cut someone, but I was so happy that she.
He was a jerk. He
I
was a jerk.
know. If we could cut anyone, I would cut him too. But he was a total jerk. Yes. Yeah, I know. He was not abiding by the bargain of the situation. Not at all.
Deal. You know what you're supposed to do.
Right.
you know.
But so I was thinking about Margaret and Belle. So Belle's living this one life, and Margaret's living a completely different life. And in this one story, we don't get a sense really of how much. I mean, Margaret knows she might be acting as a shade. So she has this sense of what Belle's doing. But why is it that, so Margaret, it's not something that would crossed Margaret's mind to do, and that's because she is more innocent. She doesn't have the responsibilities. She doesn't need to make money like Belle does, or
Well,
all, or she's got
her
lighter skin and she,
her perspective on life is different.
yeah,
You know, she is. That's why one of the reasons I made her light skinned, even though that is a stereotype in terms of having being light and bright, near
yeah,
white kind of thing. That your
yeah,
life is going to be easier. Well, no, this is like the saying. I made her that way because I was trying to capture a particular thing. That is not to say that light skinned people don't do the things that Belle does. That is not to say that. It's
no,
just that Margaret is a different person.
right,
She sees life differently. She lives her life differently. Um, Belle is her friend, and she knows how Belle is. But that's Belle. I mean, it's just like
mhm.
we all
Just two
have
different,
friends who are different. Yeah, two different ways of seeing life, and you can
yeah,
have that in any community, even though you might live in the same building. It's or you know each other, you're friends, but that person just perceives life differently. And
yeah,
that's why the story is like that. Why you got Margaret's perspective and then Belle's perspective, because they're both black women, they both have kids, they both live in this community, but their perspectives are different in terms of what's important to them, how they perceive life, what they're willing to do,
yep,
in
to
order
survive.
to yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So Richard, we haven't talked at all about Richard.
I love Richard.
I know. He comes in and he's like a big bear and he almost is
Yes.
like enveloping Margaret and she's having a great time. And then the end of the story where we don't, this is all they'll see. At the end of the story, he's going to supposedly be giving a ride to so for people who haven't read the book or whatever, will we see any of Richard again or
Yes, Richard is in a later story, and Richard is based on a real person too.
oh,
Um, who was a truck driver, and actually, when I was writing Richard, I saw this person, and just a all around good guy kind of person. Just wants him a good woman, a good meal, and a nice bed to sleep in. You know what I mean? Just real doesn't have grandiose ideas. You know what I mean?
yes,
He's
yes,
not. He's
just
not.
wants to,
Yeah, he's not particularly ambitious or anything. He just wants to work his job and live his life. And
right.
I like Richard. He's a
I
cool
did
guy.
too. I did too. And I was hoping, I mean, at the
Yeah,
end of
he
the story,
comes
we
back.
don't know. I'm like, I hope they can end up together.
He comes back. He comes back,
Yeah.
and of course Margaret comes back.
Yep.
Because really the three women. There's Diane, Belle, and Margaret. These are the three women and their children, of course. 'Cause it takes off like that, and they're the crux of it. And then we see their kids grow up, and at the end, the last story is Diane's daughter. I think her name. I can't remember her name.
I don't have that one in front. Yeah.
Oh, it's called Persia. Her daughter is Persia,
Yeah.
and yeah. So it starts with these three women in the '60s, and it goes up until the '80s. Where
Hmm.
Persia ends the cycle. But I'm working on another collection of short stories, but it's just too much work right now. So
Well, I know I'm supposed to concentrate just on the story, but I do want to ask you because you write in a lot of different genres. And what are your other books? And like, how do you go back and forth between fiction and poetry?
it's like whatever moves you at the time. With poetry, I don't know. It's like I've got. I just finished this fourth book of poetry, Boulders, which is it's called Detroit Nature Poems,
Oh,
and
nice.
that was instigated by I couldn't get anything published in all of these Michigan journals and Michigan reviews. There are all these nature poems, and
Right.
it's like black people don't write nature poems, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But they're
I,
nature poems, like they're
I don't write nature poems either. I know, and I'm always like, oh, that's so lovely.
Are you a Michiganian?
Yes, yes, but I don't write
Nobody
nature
writes
poems.
nature poems, right? We have a beautiful state here. Okay. No,
Yeah.
but I had so much fun writing that book, because it was like, okay, so what? That's nature. you know,
Right. I'm looking at it.
but anyway, it's I guess it's like anybody, it's what's on your mind at the time, what's stimulating,
Right.
what's the impetus kind of a thing. But I am working on a collection. It's an aside. It's called Yellow Girls.
Oh, interesting. So tell me about that. What's
I'm interviewing my aunts.
okay, so this is like the nonfiction version of
No, it's gonna be fiction, but I'm
oh,
trying
it's
to get
gonna be
stories from them. I'm trying to get some stories from them. And my aunt said to me, I said, I want to interview you. And she said to me, I don't like that title. You should call it Melanin Challenged Women.
oh. Okay. That's so cute. And you have
Because my
seven
aunt,
ants. You have
yeah,
seven
and my
ants,
aunt are all these light-skinned women,
right?
and I'm just trying to get their perspectives on how did being light-skinned
Mm-hmm.
affect your life.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a positive or negative experience? Um, and I don't know where it's going. I've got some ideas and some notes and things, but I just thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah. So, and instead of like following, I think I might know the answer to this because I think I do a similar thing, but you're going to get all the information, but then fiction, you choose fiction instead of nonfiction. Is that because it gives you some freedom? Like,
I can do what I want.
yeah,
Exactly. Because
yeah.
when you write nonfiction, you got to tell the truth all the time. Who wants to
I
deal with the truth?
who
You
wants to
know?
do that?
Yeah,
I know.
when you can just say what you want to say.
Yeah,
So,
you can't bring in the ghosts. You can't bring in the,
exactly.
I
You can't
love,
make the ending different. It's like, who wants to do that? I'm not an essayist. I mean, I've written essays, but that is not fun to me.
no, no, me neither. Like, I would just rather have free reign. And also, I sometimes think that with fiction, I can get to the heart of what I want to say better than with nonfiction. Like, nonfiction,
Exactly.
yeah, your feelings don't come through.
The responsibility is different with nonfiction,
Exactly.
and I don't want that burden.
Mhm.
That's a burden,
It is a burden.
Yeah, it's
It
like I'm not a
is.
journalist,
No, I
so
remember I wrote a story and like I got the kind of trees wrong in the story. Like I think I had someone climbing a tree. It must have been like I don't know if I had him climbing an elm tree and you can't climb an elm tree, or I don't know anything about trees. So I don't know. And someone came up and they were like, you can't climb that kind of
we
tree.
don't have nature, remember?
Yeah. And I was like, I didn't know that. Thank God I don't write nonfiction, or those people would be coming up all the time. You got that wrong. Okay, so is there anything about the story that I haven't touched on that you thought would be an interesting thing to talk about this particular story? Well, how about the title, The Beard?
Oh, yeah, I changed the title a number of times. But I just put it there, I guess, because I was assuming everybody would know what a beard is, because it's a pretty general term in our culture. So I thought it was a very conventional use of the term for maybe a somewhat unconventional story.
Well, I don't, okay, what do you mean by the, no, I'm gonna look, I mean, you mean just like, I don't know, what's a beard?
No, a beard is like, oh, okay. I thought it was. It's like,
I
like a
don't
gay.
know. I hope I know when you'd say
Okay,
it,
it's like
but
a gay
I
guy who invites a girl on a date because she
no.
wants. Oh, I thought people knew this.
I
Okay.
mean, me. Maybe
I was
everybody does with
always
me. Maybe everybody does
okay.
with
Well,
me. Okay.
the being in the sense that if a gay guy invites a girl out, he's trying to let uh, so that people will think he's straight. So
Interesting.
she's his beard.
No,
Um,
I didn't.
she's
Oh
his.
my God. No, I've never heard
I
that in
was
my
like,
life.
"Yeah."
Oh my God. I'm so glad I asked that question. I
Well,
hate
yeah,
how,
I was okay. I just assumed because you know
well,
what, you know.
my
Go ahead.
son's gay. My son's gay. Maybe I'll ask him if he knows that term. That's interesting.
But it's not just because it's I okay because it's anytime you use that kind of a masquerade because
Yes.
it's the idea of a masquerade. The beard is it's you're covering up. You're hiding something.
Interesting. Oh,
I
wow.
thought
Okay.
okay, I
No,
thought that
that's
was
fascinating. Isn't that wild? I'm so good.
no, no.
So,
It's a good thing you asked that because I thought that was common general knowledge.
I
I,
mean, sadly, it may be, and it may just be. All right.
yeah.
Well, I guess we probably should stop because we've gone on for almost an hour.
Oh,
But
my forever
everybody,
problem.
yes. Well, I hope we meet in person sometime
That would
soon.
be
And
great.
everyone should read Shades. Thank you so much, Esperanza.